We begin this list with some of the most carefully calculated killers in history and end up with some current killers that you've never heard of. Before we start, let's give our deepest respect and thoughts of peace for the victims and their families of these horrible serial killers. Number 6. Amelia Dyer. Amelia Dyer, also known as the Ogress of Reading, is one of Britain's most infamous serial killers from Victorian times. You see, Dyer got into the business of baby farming. Yes, that's right, baby farming, around the 1860s. In those days, if a baby's parents weren't married, the father didn't have to support them. So many mothers were left with no choice but to give their babies away for a fee. They trusted people like Amelia to take care of their babies, and that was clearly the wrong choice. Instead of caring for them, Amelia's killer method was to let them starve and suffer. Sometimes she even gave them a dangerous syrup called Mother's Friend, which was just a bunch of liquid opiates in a bottle. Some friend, huh? Now, you'd think someone doing such nasty stuff would get caught right away, but nope, not this sneaky killer. She got away with it for ages. Eventually, the authorities caught on to her because there were just so many babies who were getting sick under her watch. When they finally nabbed her, she basically got a slap on the wrist. 6 months of hard labor. But guess what? That didn't stop her. Dyer just got even sneakier. She changed her name a couple of times and even moved around to avoid getting caught again. Eventually, her luck ran out when the remains of a baby found in the Thames was linked to a Mrs. Thomas, one of Dyer's aliases. When authorities searched this killer's home, they smelled something awful. No bodies were found, but it seems like the stench had remained. More babies were ultimately discovered in the Thames, each tagged with white tape. Dyer later admitted that the white tape was her twisted serial killer way of marking them. In March 1896, Dyer went to trial, claiming she wasn't right in the head, but no one bought it. She was guilty of sin, and the authorities made her pay for it with her life. In the end, this serial killer was awarded capital punishment on Wednesday, June 10, 1896. Number 5. Luis Garavito. Born in 1957 in Colombia, a man called Luis Garavito didn't grow up to be your average Jose. His career choice was a little different. He became a serial killer of the most chilling kind who would go on to tragically end the lives of 189 boys during the 1990s. Sadly, many of his victims came from poor neighborhoods separated from their families who couldn't afford to care for them. But what drove Garavito to commit such heinous acts? Well, his childhood was no walk in the park. Growing up in Western Colombia, he endured abuse from his father and from others, leaving scars that would later manifest in unthinkable ways. That's no excuse for such extreme evil serial killer behavior, though. In the 1990s, Garavito embarked on a horrific journey. His victims, mostly boys aged 8 to 16, were reported missing or found not alive. One thing in common amongst all of his victims was they were very badly harmed in all possible ways. But fear not, for justice would eventually catch up to this killer. The discovery of a grim graveyard containing the remains of 36 boys sparked a nationwide manhunt. Finally, Garavito's reign of terror had been exposed, sending shockwaves through the hearts of Colombians everywhere. Finally, in 1999, Garavito was arrested for harming a young boy. During his interrogation, he dropped a bombshell. He confessed to being a serial killer and to ending the lives of at least 140 boys. Eventually, he was sentenced to 835 years in prison, a fitting end for a man who regrettably robbed so many of their futures. From the reports of the crimes committed back then, it looks like Garavito targeted his victims by using disguises. The serial killer would either dress up as a monk or a priest, which eventually earned him the nickname of El Cura, or the priest, in the Colombian media. If this wasn't bad enough, Garavito would also lure the boys in with promises of money or a drink. The most shocking part about this is that the killer's spree spanned wide and far across Colombia, with murders occurring in at least 11 of its 32 departments of Colombia. Number 4. Robert the Butcher Baker Hansen. In the long list of Alaska's most dangerous killers of all time, the name Robert Christian Hansen around the time of 1939 ranks quite high. Despite appearing really friendly and mild-mannered within his community, why are so many serial killers charmers? Hansen was a man who was filled with dark impulses, to the point where he was eventually given the nickname the Butcher Baker since he had worked in his father's bakery. We'll go to his bakery a solid never. Hansen's criminal activities began with an act of arson committed on a school bus depot. This was reportedly a retaliation after he was bullied. But instead of facing the music, he packed his bags and hightailed it to the last frontier, hoping for a fresh start. In the rugged beauty of Alaska, this killer blended in like a chameleon, a friendly face, even a respected member of the community. But behind closed doors lurked a darkness that would chill you to the bone. His victims, often young women ages 16 to 19, suffered horrifically at Hansen's hands. From the local reports, it is said that Robert would abduct these women and bring them into the deep wilderness, release them, and then hunt them down. For over a decade, from 1971 to 1983, this killer's next-level Hunger Games went unchecked. He roamed free, leaving a trail of devastation in his wake, taking the lives of over 17 to 21 people and assaulting more than 31 women. But justice eventually hunted him down. The nightmare finally came crashing down when one brave soul managed to escape his plane and alert the authorities. Convicted of multiple murders, Hansen received a sentence of 461 years in prison without the chance of parole. This serial killer died in prison in 2014. Number 3. Patrick the Psychopath MacKay. In the southeast region of England lies the county of Kent, where Patrick MacKay carried out a horrific killer spree in the 1970s that left him with the nickname of the Psychopath. MacKay's true colors began to emerge at the young age of 13. His first victims were innocent animals, cruelly snuffed out by his twisted axe, well-known signs of a future serial killer. By 15, he was diagnosed as a full-blown psychopath after trying to take the life of a fellow boy. Even his teachers saw the danger he posed. One of them, at the time, had ominously predicted that he would become a murderer of women. And wouldn't you know it, he lived up to the prediction. Trust your teachers, folks. As an adult, this serial killer went beyond what his teachers had expected and began targeting wealthy older women in posh London neighborhoods, mugging, assaulting, and killing. But that was just the tip of the killer iceberg. It all came tumbling down for Killer MacKay in March 1975. This is when he wielded an axe upon Catholic priest Father Anthony Crean. It was the moment the law finally caught up with this killer as he was dragged out in handcuffs. Now, here's where things get really eerie. When the police started connecting the dots, MacKay didn't deny a thing. Instead, he shocked them all by confessing to over a dozen other murders. Truth hurts, but this was a true nightmare that came to life. Despite his killer confession, unbelievably, authorities struggled to find concrete evidence. This means that many of his crimes were never really solved. Ultimately, the police had to close the books on the rest of the serial killer story. During MacKay's trial, his defense argued he was insane. But of course, medical experts diagnosed him as a psychopath, meaning he didn't fit the legal definition of having a mental disorder. The trial was swift and lasted only 20 minutes. MacKay pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder, and he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms. However, he has repeatedly come up for parole even as recently as 2022. Hopefully the board won't ever make the mistake of granting a confessed serial killer his freedom. Number 2. Karl the Forgotten Cannibal Denke. In the sweet little German town of Münsterberg, Karl Denke, born in 1870, led a double life. By day, he was a respected meat seller known for his delicious meat offerings at the market. But by night, he was a serial killer, preying on the vulnerable and profiting from his terrifying deeds. Can you see where we're going here? Warning, it's going to get pretty gross. Denke's serial killer spree began as early as 1903. He began targeting the homeless and the ones who barely had any family around them. Though he continued carrying out his sinister serial acts behind closed doors, on the outside, he seemed pretty nice and charitable. First, a nice baker and now a friendly butcher? Denke was the extra warped type of serial killer who loved to meticulously document his crimes. It was this habit that would unknowingly aid investigators to finally bust him. But the question is, how was Denke able to keep his serial killer ways under wraps? Well, his meat-selling business provided the perfect cover. The boneless meat he peddled was, in fact, you guys, this is so creepy, sourced from his victims. How can we ever trust butchers again? Denke almost seemed unstoppable, and his heinous acts would carry out until 1924. This was when a beggar accused Denke of attacking him with an axe, and he went straight to the police. At first, no one believed it because Denke seemed like such a nice guy. But the police arrested him anyway, proving that in the end, it's always the seemingly nice guys. When this serial killer heard the police might search his house, he got scared and ended his own life in his cell. And what the police ended up finding was truly beyond anything they'd ever imagined. Inside Denke's house were lots of pots, and you could probably guess what was inside them. And there were even more containers labeled with specific body parts. I can't stop thinking about a serial killer butcher selling meat at a public market. I think I'm just going to be a vegetarian now. Number 1, Harrison Cookie Monster Graham. Harrison Graham was a pretty familiar figure in his Philadelphia neighborhood. Known for his cute imitations of the Cookie Monster and his favorite Cookie Monster doll, this mentally challenged young man was liked by all the local children. But behind the facade of childlike innocence lurked a darkness that would shock even the bravest souls. A serial killer that no one suspected. It all began in early August 1987 when a heated argument with his landlord led to Graham to abruptly leave his apartment. But as the days passed, a foul odor began to emanate from his residence, which naturally made the neighbors pretty upset. Before long, the police were knocking on Graham's door demanding answers. But what they found inside was beyond anything they'd ever imagined. The front door had been nailed shut, which hinted at something sinister lurking within. Once they were able to finally get in, they saw massive heaps of garbage lying around everywhere. Not only that, there were also filthy mattresses and spoiled food littered across the apartment, which was infested with rodents and cockroaches. Yuck. Yet, the source of the smell was something far more evil. You see, among the filth, police discovered the decomposing remains of 2 women. As they continued their search, they uncovered not 1, not 2, but 4 more sets of skeletal remains within the tiny apartment. They had stumbled upon a serial killer den. Naturally, a search was set out to locate the killer. Then, on August 16th, he surrendered himself at a local police station. During questioning, he admitted to being a serial killer and to 7 murders, all committed within the past 18 months. Graham confessed, and despite his mental health condition, he was deemed competent to stand trial, but later found unfit for execution, which meant he would spend the remainder of his life incarcerated, and is where he still is to this day. The only thing he asked for after the trial was his Cookie Monster doll. A serial killer who wants his stuffy. So very strange. I'm glad to be done with this terrifying serial killer list. I wish I could say there wasn't a big list to choose from, but unfortunately, there are a lot more lesser-known killers and their terrible stories out there. Did I miss a lesser-known serial killer you know about? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. I'm gonna go scream in my pillow now, and as always, like and subscribe. Later.